let's start. Either one of you want to go first? Does it matter? Yeah, Tatiana? All right, come on up. Give her a round of applause, folks.
All right. Hi, good morning. I wrote this poem in hopes that you might connect to experiences the way I do, so here it is. There's a wall in my room, the only one decorated, with reminders and thoughts and feelings unregulated. Afraid of what's displayed, the wall is angled away from my sight. I'm not one for confrontation or what I wrote the other night. I downplay what I've noted with vibrant colors of blue and green. I'm convinced if I stare at them long enough, it might increase my overall dopamine. You see, my walls, they used to tell stories of grand playtime adventures. Fast forward, they are now empty, except for one with written content censored. There's a wall in my room, with my mind plastered all across. Smeared in Sharpie was once the patter of my heart, which is now drilled to complete exhaust. I've abandoned the wall, kept it out of my vision, regretfully disregarding my ideas, abstraction, and humanly composition. I'm not afraid of how I feel. Why else would we be alive? There is so much to experience. We are not put here to simply die. There's a wall in my room that preserves the past and present, and even though the time capsule might be just a bit unpleasant, it is my reminder to accept the feeling entirely and live in every second.
So we got a poet for you there. We also have someone who has written some fiction that she would like to share. Shagun, come on up.
Hello, and welcome to Writers Expo. I wrote this short story in a class. It's called Marionette, and I'll just be reading just a snippet of it. But if it makes it into Slant of Light, you could read the rest of it. Pale white lines tug, winding and twisting down to the young girl. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he made the small bear hug her, his little paws giving the biggest hug in the world. His hug could wipe any tear, smile to any happiness, heal any wound, all to make his girl smile, all to calm her frail heart, all to make his girl sigh and close her eyes. It wasn't until she closed her eyes, she relaxed and breathed deeply, would the bear go limp. It wasn't until then the boy would detach the silky strings from his marionette controllers, allowing the strings to fall down delicately to the teddy bear. Marion always stopped to gaze at the child through a doorway on the roof. The girl's soft face against her fluffy teddy bear made Marion's mouth curve upwards into a small smile every time. Nothing could compare to how warm he feels on these cold nights. He softly dropped down from her roof down to her floor. Staring at her, he reached out, wishing she might be able to see him if she were awake. Marion's hand simply vanished as his pale fingers passed through her round cheek. After a pause, he shook his head, incredulous that he even tried. Using her furniture, he leapt adeptly back up to the roof and closed the door while up there. Quickly and silently, Marion walked, bouncing over Faye's windowsill. Oh, when will she ever get rid of that toy? A woman chuckled as she gently tucked in her snoozing daughter in. Faye's old sock monkey had to be stitched up yet again by her. He quickly leapt over a small alleyway. Ine lay there on the cold stone, hugging his mother's handmade doll for his dear life. Marion continued over the large rooftop of Lucy's beautiful mansion. She was in her king-size bed with 16 stuffed animals surrounding her, each equally loved with all her heart. These toys may seem like nothing, but they are the stars to these children. Marion's heart felt as light as his tread, seeing his daily work like a gardener would, looking at his flourishing flowers. His delicate feet tapped quietly on the rooftops, his marionette controllers softly clacking against each other in his left hand, and his oversized coat shuffled and shushed them. He gracefully twirled around the chimneys and stayed clear of the bird's nest. A faint sound reached his ear. And that's all.
not easy to get up here and share your work. In fact, we've heard from a few students this year that they would like to share their work, but they're nervous about it. They would prefer to be anonymous. So for both of you to get up here and share your work, we really appreciate it. Can we just give them one more round of applause? Awesome stuff, and yeah, I've had the privilege of reading the rest of that story, and it is very interesting and very creative, and I was not predicting it was going to go the way it went. So yeah, I hope it gets into Slant of Light too, which gives me a nice little opportunity to plug Slant of Light, our literary arts magazine here at LHS. If you would like to share your writing, but you're hesitant about getting up here behind a microphone, we would love to publish the work in the magazine, and we do allow for anonymous submissions as well. So something to keep in mind, particularly because our deadline, April 1st, is coming in just over a week. So you get some time to put things together and consider it. All right, poetry, then fiction, and now we're going to talk a little bit the world of nonfiction with a member of our own community who I have a little introduction read for. Here we go. Today's main presenter has spoken numerous times at LHS about history. Today, we get to hear him talk, like I said, about writing, which he knows something about as he's written 10 books. And yes, you heard that correct, 10 books. A longtime Libertyville resident. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Joe Nemmers.
Good morning. I've never appeared on a stage with grass before. This is kind of an interesting thing. My wife is with me this morning, and I told her the last time I was on this stage was June of 1973. I had just graduated from Carmel High School, and I got talked into doing a duet with a girl from my class, a singing duet for a benefit here in Libertyville. It was not my proudest moment up here, so hopefully today will be a little bit better than that duet. I like to walk around when I talk. I can see what you're doing and looking at me and hopefully be able to engage. Just for my curiosity, how many of you students are writers, want to be a writer, interested in writing, thinking about writing, going to go to college to be a writer, want to be an English major? Well, few. That's good. How many faculty from English or fine arts are here today? 1, 2, 3. All right. Just wanted to see what the audience is. As Mr. Tooley, is that flipping on me here? There we go. I am Joe Nemmers Jr. I was born and raised in Libertyville, lived here most of my life. My dad was a 1947 graduate, even though I went to Carmel. He went to Libertyville 1947. We'll talk about him just a little bit later. I did write 10 books. And Libertyville features prominently in a number of those books. I tell family stories, family history about growing up here in the 50s and 60s and what that was like. And it was a wonderful place then, and it's a wonderful place now to be able to grow up. We're going to talk a little bit today about my experience. We're going to talk about the benefits of writing, which for me has been throughout my whole life, in my business career, in my Army career, and then later in life as an author. I didn't start writing books until after I retired from Abbott Laboratories. So I worked at Abbott for 27 years. I was an executive when I retired. And then I started writing books. And we'll explain that just a little bit later. Let's see if we can get this. So we will talk about the benefits of writing. I'm going to talk about my early experience in English, which was really unfortunate. I was a terrible student in English. I didn't start out very well towards a career in writing. We'll talk about careers in writing for you, the effects of machine writing or artificial intelligence on creative writing. It's a really fascinating thing that's happening very, very quickly right now. How I use writing in my business and Army careers, because I used it all the time, and I'll explain to you how I did that. My migration from a business executive to an author, and then we'll do some questions and answers, hopefully, when we're done. So I said I didn't have a very good beginning as it comes to English or writing. I went to St. Joe's in Libertyville, just a few blocks away. Any of you guys go to St. Joe's at all? So from 4th grade to 8th grade, we had English. I hated it. There were 2 reasons I hated it. One, I never got a grade higher than a D when I was an English student. Teachers didn't know quite what to do with me because I got A's in history and in social studies and reading. I did okay in math, and I never got a grade higher than D in English, and I hated it. And there were 2 reasons. One, I didn't like my teacher. I had the same teacher the whole time, and she didn't like me. But the second thing was, all we did was learn the mechanics of English. We learned verbs and adverbs, direct objects, dangling participles, colons and semicolons, and we never used what we learned. We just had to memorize this stuff over and over again. And I didn't like that. And it was the effect of, like, if you were taking driver's education for 4 years here at Libertyville, memorized everything and never got to drive a car. That was how I looked at it. We learned all these mechanics of English and never really had the opportunity to use it. So I didn't do well in English. In fact, my English teacher in grade school told my parents I would not amount to much of a student in the rest of my career. So I worked pretty hard after that to prove her incorrect. Go to high school, fast forward. I went to Carmel, as I said, and I was excited to go. I got my schedule right before the start of freshman year. And what was my first class on my very first day? The very first class of my high school career was freshman English. And I thought, oh man, this is going to be terrible. My worst subject after grade school. And I've got freshman English. This is how I'm going to start my high school career. As it turned out, I didn't have much to worry about. My freshman English teacher was a wonderful guy named Mr. Jerome Donahue. And he introduced us to two things my freshman year. The first was a love of literature, and the second was he taught us how to write stories, and he made us do it over and over again. So he taught us about, in fact, we read quite a bit about Hemingway and Shakespeare, James Joyce, William Faulkner, Edgar Allan Poe, all of these authors, and I learned to get a great appreciation for literature. But the second thing he did throughout the year was he taught us how to write stories, and how to compose a story, and the 5 or 7 fundamentals of writing stories, short ones, and he had us write them over and over again. So I learned how to write a competent story, which for the rest of my high school career was really important. It was when I went to college. When you go to college, you write a lot. When you go to graduate school, that's all you do is write. So for me, it was pretty helpful having Mr. Donahue take care of that. And so I did pretty well in high school, took more English courses. Fast forward to college, I went to Arizona State University. My last class in college was a class named English Rhetoric. It was taught by a very popular professor named Mr. Herman. He was a friend of mine. I had a friend in Army ROTC. He was a great teacher, and his version of English Rhetoric was about teaching us compactness, how to write less is more. He would say, look at that sentence and see if you can say the same thing in half the amount of words. Look at that paragraph and see if you can do it in half the amount of time. And again, just like with Mr. Donahue my freshman year, he had us write over and over and over again and challenged us to continuously do more with less. And it really affected my writing style. Came in very handy for me in business writing, came in handy to me, as I'll explain to you, in the Army, and certainly when I wrote books. So if you look at my career with English and with creative writing, it started out really badly in grade school. It got better when I went to high school. It got better when I went to college. And I ended up using it my whole life. I use it every day to this day. And that's part of the encouragement as we talk about benefits of writing. So one of the things that happened was when I was a senior at Carmel, it was time to pick what I wanted to do in college. And I wanted to be a history major. I loved geography, history, social studies. And all these adults in my life kept saying, don't, what are you going to do that for? I mean, they wanted me to be an architect, an engineer, an accountant, something they could get their head around that paid well when I got out of college, a history major. You going to teach? I said, no. They said, you going to go to graduate school? I said, no. They said, what are you going to do? I said, I like history. Things will work out. For me, it did. But my mom gave me permission. She said, you know what? If you want to be a history major, be one. Follow your passion, do what you want to do. You might get the same reaction if you tell people, I want to be an English major. I want to be a fine arts. I want to be a creative arts major. Do what you want to do. Follow your passion. If that's what you really want to do, then go do it. So, if you want to make a living as an author or as a writer, here are just some things you can do. You can be an author. You can write a book. It's a lot easier to write books these days than it used to be. Back in the day, you had to contact the publisher, have a pretty good idea, pay some money, and it took a long time to be able to do that. A lot of the work was done typing manuscripts, sending things back and forth. Now everything's done online. I go through self-publishing. I have a publishing company I work with. If I need more editing help or more creative content help, I hire them to do that. But you can be an author. It's not the easiest way to make a living, but it's a great and very fulfilling way to do it. You can be a journalist. You know, back when I got out of college, if you wanted to be a journalist, you could work for a newspaper, you could work as a sports reporter. There wasn't a lot. Today, with the internet, there's a million things you can do with web content and blogging and podcasts, and you can actually work as a journalist in many different ways. You can be a blogger. You can work in public relations. That's working for a company like I work for Abbott. You work telling the story of the company out to the public for investment and for other things. You can work in marketing for a marketing company. You can be a writer for a company that does marketing for other companies. You can work in the marketing department of a larger firm. Not a bad way to make a living. And you can do technical writing. This is one that people don't know much about. So for example, at Abbott, we have a lot of pretty sophisticated products, and our technical writers would do two things. One, they would write for all of us to explain how a certain product or a device worked, but they would also do technical writing for more technical people to be able to do. It's an interesting skill set, but there are a lot of jobs. This is just a little subset of what that would look like. I didn't use my writing to make a living. I used it to help me make a living, but I didn't make a living from being a writer, as I'll explain later. So let's talk about the effects of machine writing or AI. You've heard a lot, everybody's heard a lot about artificial intelligence in the last 6 months, and a lot of what you hear is fear. You know, it's going to take over the world, it's going to take over our minds, it's going to start nuclear war, it's going to run our businesses, it's going to cause all kinds of chaos. One of the benefits of being older is I remember a lot of things, and when the internet was introduced a little less than 30 years ago, people had the same reaction. What's this internet thing? I can sit at the computer, I can make 2 clicks, and I can find more information than I could spend in 6 months at the Libertyville Library. How's that possible? It's going to take over the world. Well, it didn't take over the world. It made things a lot easier for all of us that we enjoy today. But you're hearing that same kind of thing today. But when we talk about AI on writing, it is already fundamentally changing how writing is done, and I think it will continue to do so. It's in its sort of infancy, as it appears to writers today. I'll give you some examples of my own. It's not a replacement for human writing. It can be, as I'll explain in my last bullet point. It shouldn't be a replacement for human writing. It's a tool. You can use it to generate story ideas. If you have writer's block, you can't think of what you want to do or how you want to start, you just ask it, and it can come up with a series of things that you want to do. It can help with proofing and editing. So I had a conversation with my editor at the publishing company I use, and he's very concerned about AI because he thinks it's going to do away with his job, and not in the way you might think. Not that the company would replace him with AI or with a robot, but that I could, in my writing, instead of turning things over to him to take a look at, would just run it through ChatGPT, do my own editing and my own proofreading, and I don't need him. I don't think either one of those things is going to happen entirely. It's just a tool that helps us do things a little bit better. One of the things that is out there that people haven't thought about is AI can help with the democratization of writing. Writing isn't easy to do. Those of you who are writers know that. It's not the easiest thing. But for people who are new writers, who are non-English speakers, you may have a learning or a physical disability, AI can be particularly helpful, particularly if you can't sit behind a computer for more than 2 hours because you have chronic pain, for example. It's voice recognition. There's a lot of ways AI can help people write that were not available before. It's a tool. It cannot replace the authentic human voice. So I did an experiment after I talked to Mr. Tooley, and I took the first 2 paragraphs of my book, the very best we had, about the 4 young Marines from Libertyville High School who died in World War II. Took the first 2 paragraphs, I cut and pasted, and I put it into ChatGPT on my phone, 4.0. It took about 20 seconds, and it resynthesized those 2 paragraphs. And if you read it, you'd say, yeah, that's what Joe was pretty much talking about. The facts, the figures, the dates were all in what AI had generated off of what I had written. But what was missing was me. My voice was not in those 2 paragraphs. A machine wrote it, I didn't write it. And when we write, as the previous speaker talked about, it's our emotion, it's our intellect, it's our conscious choice to use certain words. And the machine didn't do that. One of the things I've gotten as feedback from people who know me, who've read my book, they say, I can hear you talking. It's your voice in the book, not just the voice you hear right now, but they know me, who I am, my values, what I think about, how I communicate is in the book. That doesn't happen if a robot writes the book. So a big thing you're going to hear about as we talk about creative writing in AI is it can't replace the authentic voice, which is you. It's your voice and how it's going to work. So there's a lot to learn and manage. There's a lot to regulate. There's a lot to be concerned about, just like it was with the internet all those years ago. But it's going to be a really interesting tool, and I'm very curious to see how it works. I told Mr. Tooley when I was doing my book about a year ago, I looked at AI, and I didn't use it to edit or proof like I just told you a second ago. I tried to use it as a reference source. I would put in stuff about the Battle of Okinawa. And all it did was tell me where I could go to get the information that I needed, instead of just me going to the internet. So it was a little helpful, but not terribly much. So one of the reasons I was asked here today was to talk about how have I used writing in my life. I'm not a professional, or wasn't a professional author for 40 years of my working career. So what did I do? Well, I used writing every day. From the day I started at Abbott, from the day I started in the Army. I used it to communicate. As I rose higher in the organization, became a supervisor, a manager, and eventually an executive vice president, you have to communicate. And a big way to do that is electronically now, but through emails and through all employee meetings and communications. So I use it all the time. I use writing constantly, and you will too. So I didn't have to be an author to do that. It was important to provide clear direction. The written word is a great way to do that. Sometimes when we talk, people don't get it, but if you write it down, they have a chance to read it, multiple times. Everyone's on the same page. So an example that I had was, it's been a long time now, I was given responsibility for an Abbott business that was struggling. It was a big business, 13,000 people, 130 countries, selling all the same products, but the business was in trouble. And I had to spend time getting everybody together, everybody back on the same page. And the only way I could do that was through the written word. And I had to be very careful how I did that because I was communicating across different languages and different cultures. And I couldn't do it if I didn't know how to write. And I wrote my own stuff. Excuse me, I didn't rely on other people to do it. So for me, for 40-some years, being able to write has been critically important for me. And it continues to be, and it will be for you. So these are my books, colorful stuff. So I've written 10, as Mr. Tooley said. There's a couple books on family stories that I wrote about growing up here in Libertyville, things that I wanted to capture for my kids and my grandkids to understand what I went through, some stories about them, about growing up here in Libertyville. So about 3 of those. I wrote a book on leadership. I wrote a book, you see the white book in the middle, it says Small Stories. And I wrote that book on purpose to challenge myself to be compact. I was thinking of Mr. Herman in my last class in college where he taught us to do less or more with less. And so the title of the book is Small Stories, and it says small stories are shorter than short stories. I didn't want to write a short story, I wanted to write a small story. And what I challenged myself to do was to write, I found 44 stories in my head I wanted to talk about. And I wanted to write each one on one page, to try to capture the richness of a story, but only use one page of the book to do it. And it was really an interesting exercise in compactness to teach me how to write better. And it turned out to be kind of a fun exercise. For the reader, it's not too tough because you get 44 stories and 44 pages. But for me, it was really a good exercise. I've written 2 family histories. I wrote my family history and my late wife's family history. And when I wrote my family history, it was about 10 years ago. It's that brown book you see on the lower left. It was the first book I wrote, and it was my first experience at writing. And when you write history in particular, it's pretty difficult because you got to get the names and the dates, and you have to research, and you're constantly making sure that the story you're telling is accurate. And it was wearing me out after about a year. And I decided, I don't know why, at the same time, to start to write my autobiography, which is that book you see behind it. And so the reason I did that was because I wrote the autobiography as a stream of consciousness. It's not in any particular order. I just started to write. I felt the need to tell my stories. So on one hand, in the morning, I would write the history book, which was very detailed and very focused. And in the afternoon, I would write my own story, and I would just go and write. And it was very therapeutic. And both books got finished at the same time. So it was a great exercise for me to learn how to take a break a bit as I was writing something a little bit different. The book on the far right is 30 Observations on Leadership. It's something that I wrote a long time after I retired. It probably took me about 10 years to write the book, but these were things that I believed in terms of leadership and how people should perform in business and life, in the military, whatever. And that turned out pretty cool. And then the book you see on the far left is the one that I have spent a lot of time on the last couple of years, which is The Very Best We Had. Anybody here back in November when I was here for Veterans Day and heard me? And still you came back again to see me today. That's so nice of you. But this was a tough book to read. It is probably a tough book to read. It was a tough book to write. It took me 2 years of research about these 4 Marines from LHS who all ended up on the island of Okinawa in the last battle of World War II. And people have asked me, is writing a book hard? And I said, yeah, it's hard. Not to scare anybody away, but like all things in life, if it's worth it, it's going to be difficult. And it was hard. And it was emotional because I was writing about these 4 remarkable men, not much older than you are, who gave their life for our country. But it turned out great. I was here multiple times to do research, talk to the faculty, and then come back and talk to all of you. So I didn't start doing any of this stuff until 10 years ago, which was a ways after I retired. And I got the bug, and I decided I want to write. And people have also asked me, when are you going to write another book? And I was so exhausted after writing The Very Best We Had, I said, I got to take a break. It's been almost a year. And it hasn't occurred to me what I want to write next, but it will come to me. Each of these books just sort of popped into my head, and I just started writing. I call it the muse. When the muse comes to me, then I start to write. As my wife will tell you, I go in the office, I don't come out, she sees me 7 months later, and then there's the book. So everybody's a little different in terms of how it works. But for me, it's been a lot of fun to do this. I'll let you know what my next book is when I get to that point. But the purpose of today, as a community person, is to talk about the value of writing for a lifetime while you're in school, when you're in college, if you go to a graduate school, and in any career you choose, it's really, really important. You have great teachers here at LHS. I had great teachers at Carmel. Learn from them, experience from them, remember what they told you. You'll be surprised. It'll come back to you again and again and again. So, here we go. Questions, complaints, anything. We can do like I used to do at Abbott when I had all employee meetings, and if anybody didn't ask a question, I would just call on you, but I'm not going to do that this morning. Any questions about writing, about authorship? Is that a hand, or are you just expressing?
Well, you said you went to ASU, right?
Yes.
How was your experience there?
Her question was, did I go to Arizona State University? The answer is, yes, I did. And she said, how was my experience? I had a great experience. I started out in college at a small men's liberal arts college in Minnesota, and I didn't do a lot of work knowing, well, I was the first person in my family to go to college. We didn't have a lot of guidance. I probably shouldn't have gone there. I ended up transferring to ASU, huge school. I never felt more at home than I was in that big school. For me, a big school was a big deal. It worked very good for me. I had great teachers who taught me. Also, I am right at the 50% mark of my master's degree in history at ASU, so I'm back there again. But it's a great school. It's a huge school, but it's a great school. Anything else?
Couple in the middle here.
I'm sorry?
There's a couple of questions in the middle here. The middle there. Go ahead.
Oh, you got one. Go ahead.
No, I don't have a question. So like this.
Go ahead.
Any words for the youth right now here?
Can you say that a little louder, please?
Like any words for the people in here that are going to the army? Like any words for them?
That are going into what?
To the army?
Into the Army?
Yeah.
Go. It's a great place to be. I spent 13 years in the Army Reserve. It was a wonderful place to be. I learned a lot about life. I met some of the greatest people I've ever met in my life. They're still my friends. It challenged me. It made me grow up a lot faster than I probably would have otherwise. But I think the great benefit to me was not only serving my country, but the friends that I made that I still have today. Was there one here? No.
Do you have a favorite book that you wrote?
Do I have a favorite book? It would be the last one, The Very Best We Had, about the 4 Marines, because it's a great story. I mean, these 4 young guys from Libertyville High School all joined the Marine Corps separately, all ended up over time ending up on the island of Okinawa a couple months before World War II ended, all getting killed in Okinawa. It's a great story of courage and patriotism. And they were great guys when they were here. They were student athletes, class leaders, very well known here in Libertyville. So it was a really good book to write because it talks not just about them, it talks about LHS, talks about the community. So that was my favorite book. There was another one. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yeah, I was kind of interested in like the shortening sentences down, like what are some tips for doing that?
Her question was, she's interested in how do you shorten sentences. So what Mr. Herman had us do in this theory of compactness was to look at it. Let's say, for example, you had 2 commas in a sentence. Can you do it with, can you say the same thing but only have 1 comma? Can you say it without any commas? In other words, just a simple sentence. So he just had us do this repeatedly. And it's not only the sentence itself, it's the paragraph, and it may be the paragraph on the page. And so when I was writing the last book, for example, I did this every single day. I would write something and then I'd say, can I do that a little different? And I would look at that sentence and then I would write a page or 2 pages and I would go back and look at those 2 pages and say, can I shrink it down? The book is 309 pages in total. And if I hadn't done that, it'd be 500 pages and you probably wouldn't want to read it. 300 is pretty easy to do. So it's just challenging yourself to say, can I do it differently? Can I take the same text, the same richness, and shrink it? So try it. It's kind of fun. I had an English teacher in college who called commas those pesky ants. Didn't like to see those pesky ants, commas. Was there another one over here?
So I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So you said you got into writing books later in life, and they say that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I'm just wondering if you learned something about yourself, or I guess about anything in general through this?
His question was, I got into writing books later in life, which is true, and you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Yes, you can. I'm an old dog, and I have been able to learn new tricks. I learned a lot about myself in writing these books because each one I try to write better. I look back and say, my first book was okay. My second book was better. Each one I look at and I try to make it better than the one I had before. That's why I answered the question. I'm very proud of The Very Best We Had because I really think it's the best book I've written up to this point. But it's sort of the sum of the other 9. All those lessons I learned in those other books is in this book right here. And the other thing I can tell you is, particularly in the last book, almost every day that I wrote every day for 7 days a week for 7 months to write that book. I thought about Mr. Donahue, my freshman English teacher, and I thought about Mr. Herman, my senior in college teacher, every time I sat before the keyboard. Their lessons are still in my head. So I was taught those things then, and I still remember them. And I learned a lot about myself, about how to challenge myself to do better each time I wrote a book. Did that answer your question?
Yes, indeed.
Is there another one there? Where did I see one? Yes.
How do you sit down and write for so long?
How do you sit down and write for so long? That's a wonderful question. It's painful because, it's one thing to sit. I would sit, sometimes my wife is here, she'll tell you. I try to limit it because it's really hard to write for 4 hours at a shot. You may know that yourself. And to do it every day. And the reason I did it in 7 months was because I wanted to get it done by Memorial Day a year ago. And the only way I could get it done was if I did that. It's hard. And you have to get up. You got to take a break. Some days I'd write 7 hours. Some day when I was on a roll, I just didn't want to stop. Kathy would bring me potato chips in the office and feed me. And then I'd just keep typing. And when you'll get like that. Some of you have done like that when you've written poetry or stories. You just got to go to get in the way. So it's hard to sit there and do that and to do it every day, day after day. I mean, it's fulfilling. I enjoyed it. But physically, it's more difficult than people think. And particularly, like when you write history, in my case, I had most of what I needed when I started, but you're still researching while you're writing, clarifying things, checking things out to make sure it works. And it just takes a lot of focus to do that, I'm old, my brain doesn't work like yours anymore, so it takes a lot more effort. Yes?
So what methods or what strategies do you use to write for so long?
What's the last part?
What methods or strategies do you use to be able to write and produce content for
What strategies did I use to write and produce content? In this particular case, like with this book, I first heard about the story of these four Marines from Mr. Eggert, who wrote a couple of articles for the local paper. And then I just started to research. The more I researched, the more I knew I had to write their story, because the more I found, it was more and more compelling. And that's how I created the content for that. One of the questions I had last time was, how do you know when to stop? Which is a wonderful question. Because I had 25 books, I had thousands of pages of PDFs. How do you know when to stop? Well, I didn't want to write a 500-page book because you wouldn't read it. A 300-page book is about what most people can do. So I was inspired on this from Mr. Eggert's series of articles, and then the more I dug, I knew I had to write about these guys because they were so terrific. And that's how it came to me. Was there one?
So the self-publishing stuff,
Yeah.
is there like a financial risk up front? Like, were you worried at all when you were writing about doing the self-publishing thing?
This question was I worried about doing the self-publishing? The answer is no. I don't write my books for sale. I write to give away to friends and family. It's not that expensive to actually write a book and publish it on your own. You'd be surprised. It depends upon how much help you want from them. I've gotten better over 10 books, so I don't need as much help from the editor. I use them for creating the creative content, like you see the covers. I tell them what I want, but they help me create. But it's remarkably inexpensive for what you may think you can do to create books, and that includes the cost of, because you do the formatting yourself. They send you templates, and you follow the templates, create the book, do your own editing, send it in. They give you proofs, and then if you want to publish, they print them for you. So not that big of an expense by compared like you might think it would be. It's a good question. Was there another one?
Yep, put it in the back.
Whoop. Shout it out.
What was the very first couple of books that you started writing?
The very first books I wrote were these first two that I went through just a second ago, which was my family history. And at the same time, I ended up later writing my autobiography, which now is 10 years old, and I probably should update it and add an addendum to it. But those are the first two books. And writing the first book is scary. Never written a book before, and I was writing about my family. So to try to format it was one thing, but to try to get it right was another. So it was a little daunting to write my first book. But after I did it, then I was confident, and I knew I could write more.
Have you ever used Google Reading before?
I'm sorry, say again?
Have you ever used Google Reading before?
Google Rewrite?
Google Reading Write.
Oh, Read and Write? No, I haven't. Mm-mm. I am interested about using ChatGPT in the future just to see how this is going to work for me. But like I said, I'm going to have to control it. I don't want it to write for me. Yes?
Do you ever write fiction?
Do I ever write fiction? No. I was a history major. I'm getting a master's in history, so no. I don't. I did a little fiction in the end of my book. The very last chapter is a historical fiction. Historical fiction is where you take actual dates, places, and events and people, and you imagine the dialogue for the purpose of creating. And that was fun. Thank you very much.